holiday meals come holiday leftovers. So I've selected 3 recipes from the Casserole Cookbook that will help you use some of those up. So this is one of the Culinary Arts Institute cookbooks. I've cooked from these before. This particular one was published in 1954, and I decided to kick things off with a recipe that's going to help you use up some of your leftover turkey. I have this recipe for a turkey rice dinner, and I'm going to fess up and tell you right now, I'm using chicken for these recipes because it's not Thanksgiving yet and I don't have any leftover turkey, but you can easily swap between those two. I always recommend that you read through any recipe before you start cooking it, especially from these like Culinary Arts Institute cookbooks, because they are written a little bit differently than a lot of recipes that you see now. So it says like what to do in order here, but to me, the work really starts down here because you have to prepare a thin white sauce. And I feel like maybe you don't want to do all of this before you have that white sauce. You have to stop the process and make it. It's very close to every white sauce I've ever made. There's a little bit less flour and a little bit less butter because it's supposed to be thin. So I'm actually melting my butter in this pan right now. So I have a tablespoon of butter. Oh yeah, she is melted. So now I have to blend in a tablespoon of flour and a pinch of salt and MSG. I'm gonna start stirring that now. And I also need to add a little bit of pepper. So I went maybe a little more than a little bit. Sometimes when I'm using that pepper grinder, it's just very pleasant. I don't know, I just kind of zone out. So I'm stirring, letting that cook for just a minute. Flat whisk is a good thing to have here. Okay, it says heat until mixture bubbles. That is a bubbling. So I'm gonna turn the heat off and I'm gonna add 1 cup of milk. It actually says you can use some of the turkey broth in here as part of the liquid, but I don't have turkey broth right now. And it does say you can add a few dashes of hot sauce. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. Just a few. I'm gonna bring the heat back. And this is directed in the recipe. And I'm gonna let that cook for a few minutes until it has thickened. This casserole is baked in kind of a layered way. And to be truthful, I would probably just mix a lot of these things together, but I'm gonna follow the recipe and see if it makes like a huge difference. Grease my casserole dish that's behind me. I have it ready. Prepare perfection boiled rice. I'm actually, just because I'm using things that are left over, I'm using some leftover cooked rice from some takeout that I had a couple of days ago. That's something that you can do. If you've got leftover rice, use it in a casserole. Meanwhile, blanch and sliver almonds. I buy my almonds already slivered. I'm not blanching and slivering my own almonds. I've got some modern convenience advantages here and I'm gonna use them. With fork, toss almonds with soft breadcrumbs and butter or margarine. Okay, so now we can start doing some things. I have my almonds, my melted butter, and I've got my breadcrumbs here. I'm gonna move the rice out of the way. Will this dish be big enough for all of these things? I don't know. We will see. I'm probably just gonna make it work. Could it be a buttery breadcrumb topping with almonds? Set that aside. It says dice and set aside enough cooked turkey to yield. I'm cutting the recipe in half, so I needed 1 cup of cooked diced turkey / chicken. All done. Set aside. And then prepare and set aside. There's a lot of prepare and set aside here. I have my white sauce off to the side over there. The next step is with fork, gently mix drained rice and 12 pimiento stuffed olives sliced, or 6 pimiento stuffed olives sliced in my case. I actually did do a couple more because my olives were very small. Rice and olives. Here we go. I think we're almost ready to put this in the casserole dish because I feel like I have a million things around me at the moment. Combine diced turkey with ½ cup of sliced mushrooms, canned sliced mushrooms, or in my case, ½ of a can of sliced mushrooms. I diced mine up because they were just big mushroom pieces. Thought they would distribute a little bit better that way. So I did get a bowl for this one. I have to combine my chicken / turkey and mushrooms. Let's combine. It's all gonna come together here soon, I promise. All right, let's get some dishes out of the way. Let's just like line up our components here. I have rice, I have chicken, I have breadcrumbs, butter, and almonds. I have white sauce. White sauce is over here. It's still pretty hot, so I'm gonna put that right here. Spoon 1/3 of rice mixture into casserole. So it's time for the casserole dish. The full recipe goes into a 2-quart casserole dish, so I'm using a little one. 1/3 of the rice mixture. I don't know, I'm eyeballing 1/3. Add 1/2 of the turkey. Okay. It's like we're making a lasagna here, but not. If I'd used like maybe a clear glass casserole dish, you could see the layers, but it didn't go in that direction. Repeat and top with remaining rice. Okay, had to think about that for a moment. So I have a little rice, spread that out. The rest of the turkey mixture with the mushrooms. The rest of the rice. Pour sauce all over. So I made one recipe of this thin white sauce. And I actually, because I'm cutting the recipe in half, I only need 3/4 of a cup. Maybe just in the interest of not being, not wasting something, I might use all of it. Sink on in there, everybody. Get comfortable, get to know each other. I'm actually gonna let that sort of sink in for a moment. Yeah, I'm just gonna use all of it. Okay, I'm gonna give that a minute. Okay, so maybe you can tell on camera, I'm not sure. It did sink in, that white sauce I gave it a couple of minutes and it has gone through some of the layers. So now I actually just need to sprinkle this mixture of slivered almonds, sliced almonds, and breadcrumbs and butter on top. Ooh, that's gonna be good. It does give it kind of a festive look, doesn't it? Oh yes, oh wow. So now I just need to bake this in a 350-degree oven for 25 to 35 minutes. All right, I just have a little taste of my chicken/turkey and rice dish here. And as I was scooping it out of the casserole dish, I did notice that the white sauce didn't penetrate all the way to the bottom, but that also got me thinking maybe that first layer of rice is supposed to be more of a crust. Okay, I have to make sure that I get a little taste of all of it, right? Did I get an olive? Gotta get an olive, right? Okay. The olives are interesting. I mean, I know some people don't like them. They add just a little kick, like a little briny kick in there when you get one and you bite into it. Okay, this has a really good flavor. I do love that toasted almond breadcrumb butter topping. That is so good. You already know that I love a buttery breadcrumb topping on a casserole. Adding those sliced almonds just took it right over the moon for me. It also gives it a really nice texture. I don't know that the whole layering thing is necessary. I would probably mix the rice, the white sauce, I would mix all of those things together. I don't know that having that base layer of rice with no sauce is really important. I don't think it makes a huge difference because you kind of mix everything together when you scoop it out of the casserole anyway. I would just probably make the preparation a little bit simpler on myself and mix like the main casserole part of the dish together. Many thanks to Craftsy for sponsoring today's video. The last time I talked to you about Craftsy, I was getting back into knitting after my hip surgery. Well, now I'm returning to sewing, something I used to do a lot but have gotten away from in recent years. Craftsy is your online resource for all things creative. They offer over 2,000 classes in 20 creative categories such as knitting, crochet, cooking, and sewing. The sewing category alone offers classes on quilting, embroidery, pattern making, and more. They have something to fit every skill level, whether you're a beginner, a pro, or you're returning to a hobby you picked up years ago. Their classes are taught by talented experts who walk you through each technique with step-by-step demonstrations. This is a great time to learn something new or advance your existing creative skills. If you're ready to join Craftsy, you can do so via the link in my description down below. The first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the video description will get a full year of premium membership to Craftsy for only $1.49. This price is a huge savings and is a special offer for Black Friday, so you better act quickly. Thank you again to Craftsy for sponsoring today's video. And moving on to this turkey hash recipe. Look at that beautiful turkey illustration. So this turkey hash recipe is actually based on this corned beef hash with tomato recipe. And I just thought it had some really interesting things, just interesting ingredients that maybe like I wouldn't normally put together. Step one is to grease a casserole dish, done, and cook 1.5 cups of diced potatoes, which I have done and set aside. We'll get to those a little bit later. So what I'm doing right now is melting some butter in a little skillet because I have to saute a few things. I have to do mushrooms, onions, and peppers. Butter's pretty much melted. Let's start with mushrooms. Yes, these are canned mushrooms. That is what it says to use in the recipe and just sounds right for the time period. And to be honest, when I was a kid, we mostly used canned mushrooms for things. I also have some diced onion right there. And a little bit of diced orange pepper. The recipe says green pepper, but I am still working on those orange peppers, using those up from my Halloween video. I have some pieces of orange peppers that I just threw in my freezer and I want to get them used up, so it's orange today. So I'm going to heat this up just a little bit more and I'm going to let all of that cook together until the onions and peppers are soft. The onions, peppers, and mushrooms are tender. They're still kind of sizzling away, so set them aside. And now we can kind of start mixing and assembling the casserole. And I have to keep jumping back and forth between like the base recipe and the variations. So it takes me a minute. Sometimes that makes things a little bit more difficult. So I'm supposed to take my cooked potatoes and mix with my chopped turkey. So I cooked these, I just diced them and boiled them until they were soft. And then I have my chopped up cooked chicken that I'm gonna mix together in a little bowl. Of course, I know what corned beef hash is, but I've never thought of doing this with turkey. So it's kind of what got me interested in the first place. So now that I've mixed the potatoes and the chicken together, I need to mix in my sauteed onions, peppers, and mushrooms. And the mushrooms are not in the base recipe. They are an addition for the turkey hash variation. I love mushrooms though, so I'm happy about it. I'm trying to be gentle because I cooked my potatoes pretty soft. I've talked about how I prefer a very, very well-cooked potato. I also need to add some milk, actually, not milk. It says to substitute broth in the turkey hash. So some broth, salt, MSG, and pepper. So I have just a little bit of my homemade chicken stock. I have my seasonings here. That's salt, pepper, and MSG. We're getting closer. I'm gonna move this out of the way. I'm gonna bring in my casserole dish. I'm cutting the recipe in half, so I do have a 1-quart casserole dish that I have buttered. And I need to place this mixture into my casserole. So we have a few more things to go in here. Wash and cut into slices some tomatoes. So I have some tomato slices here. I drained them a little bit on paper towels and I did sprinkle them with a little bit of salt. The corned beef hash, you're supposed to put mustard on the tomatoes, but you omit that for the turkey variation. Instead, you put some sharp cheddar cheese on top, which I'm pretty excited about. I think that is a good idea. This is kind of where I'm like, never thought of doing this. Oh, I think that worked out really well. Sprinkle tomato slices with grated sharp cheddar. It doesn't even give an amount, so I just did a little bit. And I grated it pretty fine. This is gonna melt and get so delicious with those tomatoes. Sprinkle this whole thing with some buttered breadcrumbs. Yeah, I'm excited. So I melted some butter in a little dish. I need to add my breadcrumbs and also some garlic salt. So we're gonna flavor these a little bit. Super exciting. I think this would also be good with some like crumbled buttery crackers. That would be good. Sprinkle this on top. Try not to get too much on the counter like I am. Now I just have to bake this in a 350-degree oven for 30 to 35 minutes. It smells so toasty and cheesy in this kitchen. Amazing. From the buttery breadcrumbs and the sharp cheddar cheese. And there's also, I can kind of smell like the peppers a little bit too. So I'm gonna just dig in here. Kind of like I put it in this round dish and it almost makes me think like it should be cut as a pie and each person would get a slice of that tomato on top of their portion. We're gonna have a little taste here. I did let this cool for maybe like 10-ish minutes. It was piping hot when it came out of the oven. Okay, I feel I need to get a little bite of just about everything. Get the full experience here. Okay, that is good. That is good. That is well seasoned. The chicken I used was a rotisserie chicken. I feel like I'm always singing the praises of a rotisserie chicken. Should have gotten a knife so I could cut the tomato. What a good combination. That is all so good together. And I don't often think of potatoes as a base for a casserole other than like scalloped potatoes, which you're gonna see in a minute. Usually I think like rice or noodles or something like that. So the potatoes and the chicken mixed together just make a very good base for everything else. And then the tangy tomatoes on the top, so delicious. And then just topped off by that sharp cheddar and those toasty, buttery breadcrumbs. It's so good, and just like varying textures, you know. I know that some families do have both ham and turkey at holiday meals, so I thought let's throw in a ham recipe. So I decided to try a ham and cheese scallop potato recipe. And this is, I think, something that a lot of people love, and a lot of people tend to have family recipes for this dish and different methods of what they do. In this one, you actually make a seasoned flour and you shake your potato slices in that before layering them in a casserole dish. And then you pour over some scalded milk. And I've never done it this way before. I'm interested to see how it turns out. So it starts with potatoes, of course it does. And I slice these to 1/4 of an inch on a mandolin slicer. Please be so careful. If you decide to use a mandolin slicer in anything, use the handguard, okay? Use it. And just even if you're using the handguard, please be careful. They're so sharp. Alternatively, you can slice these with a knife, but I needed it to be a little bit faster than what I could do. I'm cutting this recipe in half as I am with the other recipes. This is actually one monster-sized potato. I figured it probably was the equivalent of 2.5 regular-sized potatoes as the recipe requests. So I have this reusable Ziploc bag I'm gonna try for my seasoned flour. I don't know, I've never tried it like this before. It said use a plastic bag. So I have 1/2 tablespoon of just regular flour, and I have a teaspoon of salt, 1/4 teaspoon of MSG, and 1/8 teaspoon of pepper. So that's gonna make up our seasoned flour. So I'm gonna seal that and give it a good shake just to get things mixed up. I don't know, it seems like not a ton of seasoned flour. So I'm gonna just swap some things around. I'm gonna have my casserole dish at the ready because I need to layer the potatoes in it as you know, I shake them in the seasoned flour. You do want to make sure that you have a casserole dish with a tight fitting lid, or you could probably cover this in foil as well. Reading through the recipe, I think the bake method is very interesting, and you'll see what I mean later. So I have greased this casserole dish. So I'm following the base recipe here, and then I'm following the variation for this ham and cheese potato scallop. So I'm just nicely layering this. I know some people just sprinkle the seasoned flour between their layers. I've seen that done. I actually have a very different way of doing this. And I've thought about sharing my potato recipe with you guys. Just maybe doing a video on special recipes or things that are like very requested. And maybe I can do that next year if you are interested in seeing it. I have a few that might be good to share. I also need to be layering in some ham and cheese. The recipe calls for ground ham. I don't have a meat grinder, but I actually did chop this ham up in my food processor and it worked beautifully. I chopped up a little bit more than I even needed because it was so exciting that it was actually working. Sprinkle in my ham. This is where your leftover ham would come in if you want to chop it up in your food processor. It doesn't really give any precise instructions on how to do this, so I'm just kind of doing it. I'm actually using sharp cheddar because I had some and I thought it would make for a really good flavor. Trying to like push this down a little. The full recipe calls for a 1.5 quart casserole dish, and I'm using one of my favorite 1 quart casserole dishes. And I think I'm gonna fill this thing up even though I'm cutting the recipe in half. I wanna save a little cheese to sprinkle on the top. So we're gonna go just a little bit on this layer. I'm gonna layer these on top and just the last of this. Now I have to go over to the stove and scald some milk. So I'm gonna add just over 3/4 of a cup of milk to a saucepan. And you're not boiling the milk. When you're scalding the milk, it's really kind of just like warming it to a bare simmer. You should see just a couple of teeny tiny bubbles form at the edges when it's ready. You can see the little bubbles around the edge there. So now that I've scalded the milk, I need to add my butter. So I'm gonna add that in and let it melt, and then we're gonna move back over to the casserole. I've melted that butter in my scalded milk, and now I need to pour it over the top of my potatoes. Okay. It did spill a little, it's fine. It says the milk should barely reach the top of the potatoes, and that's what I've got going on here. So I'm gonna clean this up before I forget. Let's just get you wiped up here, make sure I don't have it on the bottom. I'm gonna burn the bottom of this, you know. So the first part of baking this, I have to bake this uncovered in a 350-degree oven for 50 minutes. That's 50 minutes. And then you turn off the heat, you cover it, and you leave it in the oven for 10 more minutes to sort of like complete the whole process. All right, looking pretty toasty there. I had to bake these for so much longer than what it said in the recipe. It said to bake at 350 degrees for 50 minutes and then to cover the top and let it sit in the oven with no heat for another 10 minutes. Well, I baked this for probably 65 to 70 minutes before I moved on to the next step of covering it and letting it sit in the oven. And I don't know if it's because I sliced my potatoes to 1/4 of an inch and that was too thick. It didn't give a measurement in the recipe. Maybe I could have taken it down to like 1/8 of an inch, but I was kind of going by what you would do if you were slicing these by yourself with a knife in 1954. And I thought 1/4 of an inch probably pretty reasonable. They just weren't getting to my desired doneness. I've said before how I would rather have like a softer potato. We're gonna see. Okay, it's cutting pretty nicely. The potatoes still have a bit of a firmness to them. I'm not sure about. My other thought with a dish like this is maybe you don't have like leftover cooked potatoes or whatever from Thanksgiving, but maybe you bought that 10-pound bag of potatoes before Thanksgiving because it was a better deal than the 5-pound bag of potatoes. I see that every season. So maybe you have a lot of just like potatoes lying around that you haven't done anything with. So you could do a dish like this, or you could make a big potato and make it the main part of your meal. I have a video all about that I will link in the description down below if you haven't watched it. It's a pretty good one, I think. Okay, I think I'm ready to try these. Everything's still pretty hot, so I'm gonna be careful here. Okay, actually the potatoes are softer than I thought. I think when I was like stabbing them, I was kind of going through that top layer. And the top layer is a little bit more firm. But as you go down to the other layers, it does get a little bit softer. And the flavor is very good because there's some nice salty ham and cheese in there. I think this is a pretty good recipe. Taste-wise, like flavor-wise, it's very good. You may have to play with your cook time and your temperature and things like that, just a little bit. The Casserole Cookbook was published in 1954, and it comes to us from the Culinary Arts Institute. These books, these little skinny books, are always such a delight to me for many reasons, but the first being that they are usually divided into specific dishes, specific courses. It might be a specific season. So, and they just published so many of these. This says 102 in the upper corner. I have quite a few of these in my collection. There are just so many of them, and they're in such specific categories that if I'm thinking I want to make a video about casseroles from the 1950s, I mean, that's basically what I did for this. I went to my little section of my shelf that had the Culinary Arts Institute books, and I picked this right away. It didn't let me down. Sometimes it just makes my video planning so much easier when I can think, I want this, I want lunches, or I want desserts or breakfast or whatever, and I can just like go to the shelf and find something right away. That's a big reason, but the other one is they just have really good illustrations in them. These books mostly have illustrations. They have some pictures of the food, but a lot of the pictures are in black and white. But I'll show you the cover. I'll show you the back. Usually, the cover and the back appear in the middle of the cookbook. Yep. So here's the cover and the back together without like the title of the booklet on this page. You can see the whole thing. I don't like to say it always does, but in this case, pretty much every time I have looked at one of these, this cover and back appear in the middle. This font is incredible right here. The Casserole Cookbook, Staff Home Economists at the Culinary Arts Institute. I mentioned earlier that the recipes in these books do kind of appear differently. They're written a little differently than a lot of the recipes that we see today. There are exceptions to this, The Joy of Cooking, for me, being one of them. Those recipes are written kind of similarly in that the ingredients list is kind of incorporated throughout the instructions. Much of the time when I imagine a recipe, I imagine the title of the recipe, the list of ingredients, and the instructions, just very clearly outlined, like in blocks, Whereas these recipes, you know, the ingredients are incorporated into the instructions. It can get a little confusing because not only are the ingredients incorporated into the instructions in these books, they also have base recipes, which if you're familiar with Betty Crocker's picture cookbook, the red one, that one has key recipes in it too, so which is basically the same thing. It's a base recipe, and then you'll get variations on that recipe. And sometimes the variations are like very variationed. That doesn't make sense. They incorporate a lot of different elements or tell you to omit a lot of different things. So it can get confusing, especially when I'm trying to cut recipes in half too. So I'm like looking at a base recipe, looking at the variations, trying to do that mental math of how to cut all of it in half and omit the right things and add the right things. It's a lot. I do love these books, but they can sometimes take me a little bit longer to cook from. But let's look at some illustrations because they're always so good in here. There are some lambs here. This is for a lamb recipe. The drawings are always so good, and they are in that like 2-color black and green, black and blue kind of thing that I love so much. These crabs under here. I think you probably got a little bit of a glance when I did the turkey rice dinner at this fox. I thought he was pretty cute. The chickens are following him though, and that's dangerous. Don't do that, chickens. Oh, this is cute. So the each chapter has a little title header, and this one is for vegetable casseroles. So we've got the different vegetables printed in green and black, and then that nice scrolly font. I love it. So I briefly considered making something from the dessert casseroles chapter. Ultimately, I decided to focus more on holiday leftovers. So I didn't do that, but they do have a lot of dessert casseroles in here. So holiday bread pudding, New England pumpkin pudding, double fudge pudding, hazelnut souffle, apple graham betty, all kinds of things. So maybe when you think of a casserole, you don't always think of desserts, but you know, technically a lot of them are casseroles. Ooh, rhubarb cobbler. That sounds so good. I love rhubarb. Oh, I like this one too. It looks like 2 women having a chat over a fence. Maybe while they're doing some household tasks, they're taking a little break to chat with each other, which I love because I feel like that is so important, not only to take breaks from your household tasks, but you know, to have a sense of community with someone else, right? I think that is a very important thing to have in your life right now. I hope you can see this because there's a little tiny dog in this one. So cute. I'll show you a few photographs of the food, but like I said, they are in black and white, so they may not be the easiest to see. This one's pretty easy. Actually, this is a dessert casserole. This is the New England pumpkin pudding that I just mentioned. This is the eggs on noodles casserole. And this is the golden fluff pie. So what's golden fluff pie? Oh, it's a key recipe. Oh, there's a whole bunch of things. It's like a chicken pie with pastry, vegetables, white sauce, pimiento, sliced hard cooked eggs. So there's a base recipe to this one, and then there's a variation for the golden fluff pie. Let's talk about the recipes I made today. I wanted to focus this video on holiday leftovers because 'tis the season. It's that time of year. We end up having a lot of gatherings, family and friends, and often there's a main dish that we kind of like build the whole meal around. Around me, it's usually turkey and or ham. I know a lot of families, if you have a big gathering, they'll do both a turkey and a ham, even, you know, for Thanksgiving. For Christmas, you know, sometimes it's turkey and ham again, sometimes it's beef, sometimes it's like a prime rib or something. Christmas, at least Christmas as I remember it, and Christmas for the folks that are near me, usually it's one of those things. But I would say like a Christmas meal is not as tied to anything specific, the way that Thanksgiving is sort of tied to turkey. So Christmas, it's kind of like whatever you want to do, you know, maybe have a special meal, maybe just do like a Christmas brunch. That is always a good idea. And I might have a video coming out about that in December because a lot of times we end up having leftovers, maybe leftover turkey, leftover ham, even leftover components of a meal such as potatoes. I wanted to incorporate some of those things and give some ideas on how you might be able to use them up. So the first recipe I tried was for turkey rice dinner. And this was pretty simple. It followed a really similar formula to a lot of casseroles that I'm familiar with. you know, you have a starch. So this had rice, but you know, noodles, whatever. It had a protein. So I used chicken, even though it's a turkey rice dinner. I would say it had vegetables, but really it just kind of had like olives and mushrooms in it. You could probably incorporate more vegetables. And then it had something to bind everything together, in this case, white sauce. I find that in the 50s, like when I'm looking at casserole recipes from the 50s, a lot of times it is a white sauce or a gravy or something like that. This was very tasty. I think especially because it had an extra special topping, buttery breadcrumbs, but also almonds. And that, just like that bit of toasted almond along with those breadcrumbs. Oh, that was so good. It was such a nice addition. It complemented everything very well. I assembled this casserole according to the instructions given in the recipe. And truthfully, and I said this while I was making it, I would probably just mix a lot of those ingredients together. The rice, the white sauce, the turkey, the mushrooms, and the olives. I thought, you know, I want to try assembling it in the order that it gives here, just to see like, does this make a difference or anything like that. The only thing I noticed is the sauce didn't penetrate all the way through the casserole. And I thought, okay, maybe they're thinking this would make some sort of crust. It didn't really. It wasn't like the rice got very crispy or anything on the bottom. So I would say if I made this again, I would just like mix all those things together. I think the sauce would sort of like bind everything together a little bit more. In this case, you know, it did soak in a bit. It just didn't get all the way through. I think the real star of this recipe is the topping, for sure, for sure. I would use that topping. I mean, I use buttered breadcrumbs on casseroles and stuff all the time, but the addition of the sliced almonds, it said slivered almonds in the recipe. I used sliced almonds because that's what I keep on hand. The addition of those almonds was just like, it was a nice surprise, I think. The second recipe I tried was for turkey hash. I think this might have been my favorite. I think it was the most flavorful of the 3 casseroles that I made. I have noticed that the recipes in these Culinary Arts Institute books, I feel that they're maybe slightly more seasoned than some of the other recipes that I have made from the 1950s. I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to say that for every single recipe I've tried from one of these, but a lot of times, you know, they don't skimp on like salt and pepper and stuff. I have made things with hot sauce in them, which is like, whoa, hot sauce, at least, you know, sometimes during this time period. I thought this one was really interesting because me personally, I don't always think of like cubed potatoes as the base of a casserole. And that's what they used here. So a lot of good flavorful ingredients mixed together and a lot of good textures too. The potatoes, the chicken, the topping, like all of it. Again, this was like, I don't know, like the assembly was a little bit, I probably would have done it in a different order. There's a lot of like prepare and set aside, which I guess I do prepare and set aside a lot of things because I like to prep my ingredients before I film. Otherwise, these videos would be so incredibly long and you don't want to see me chopping everything, believe me. Oh, I loved the tomatoes on top. What a nice surprise. So it was like toasty and tangy and had that cheese, and then you had like your potatoes, your well-seasoned potatoes and chicken, etc. It was very good. Also made the kitchen smell really good. And my final recipe was ham and cheese scallop. And this was a recipe I chose to use up leftover ham. The flavor was very good on this. Like it had enough seasoning and everything. I'm not going to say that it's my favorite scalloped potato recipe that I've ever had. The bake time didn't work out so well for me, and I have some thoughts on like why that could be. And even the end result, I like a little bit of a softer potato, I think. One of the reasons that it could have taken longer or just like not turned out exactly the way that I wanted, maybe I made the potatoes a little thick. I did slice them to 1/4 of an inch, probably could have gone a little bit thinner. When I make potatoes au gratin, I make them thinner. That's kind of a different cooking process. That's the potato recipe that I've referenced in this video a couple of times. Maybe I'll share it with you sometime. The thickness of the potatoes, it could have partially been that. I was just going in my mind by like, if you didn't have a mandolin slicer, what would you do with a knife? And that's what I came up with. I suppose I could have parboiled the potatoes a little bit too, but a lot of the scalloped potato recipes that I've seen don't do that. They start with raw potatoes and you sprinkle some flour and seasonings on them and layer them and then like pour your milk and all of that. And then you bake it. So I was following the process that I've kind of seen before. And maybe I've just kind of gotten used to like a softer kind of dish with potatoes. I would probably change the process a little bit, but I would make it again just for the flavor alone, really. When I'm thinking like scalloped potatoes with ham and cheese, I always think like cut up cubed ham. The fact that this was ground ham, maybe I would have changed the process a little bit, but I would make it again just for the flavor alone, really. When I'm thinking like scalloped potatoes with ham and cheese, I always think like cut up cubed ham. The fact that this was ground ham, maybe I would have changed the process a little bit, but I would make it again just for the flavor alone, really. When I'm thinking like scalloped potatoes with ham and cheese, I always think like Like, it made it kind of like more pleasant, I think, to eat, the ham part anyway. It made it so that the ham was more distributed throughout the entire casserole. And I really did like that about it. And hey, you don't have to follow that recipe exactly. It's just maybe something that could provide you some inspiration on like what to do with this leftover ham. Maybe you get sick of just making ham sandwiches and you want to try it a different way. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope it helped you use up your holiday leftovers. I'd like to thank Craftsy for sponsoring today's video. The first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the video description will get a full year of premium membership to Craftsy for only $1.49. If you love cookbooks and recipes from the 1950s, I have an entire playlist and I'll link it in the description down below. I'd like to say a big thank you to my Patreon supporters. If you'd like to join us over there, I'll leave a link in the description so that you can do that. I hope you liked this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I post videos about food, vintage cookbooks, and retro recipes every week. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.